going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're going to the Capitol. We're going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country.
Following the storming of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, and Trump voicing his tacit approval to the rioters by saying, quote, he loved them.
This was a fraudulent election. We have to have peace. Go home. We love you. You're very special.
Twitter ended up banning Trump. Let that sink in. A major information platform felt righteous enough to stop the most powerful elected official on the planet. Following this, a host of other platforms also banned him, including, but not limited to, Google, Facebook, Reddit, Twitch, Spotify, Shopify, etc. He's of course not the first person for this to happen. Conspiracy theorist Alex Jones was also similarly banned from most of mainstream social media essentially overnight 2 years ago.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Serious crap, gay. Frogs, friggin' frogs.
But some chalked up this harmonization of policy as conspiratorial thinking, as many preferred not to think that social media platforms were harmonizing their policies in regards to whom to ban.
Frogs!
Going back to the Trump situation.
Thank you very much.
Even banks have now said that they won't do business with Trump. Sure, a man of the considerable resources of Trump has the capacity to build his own infrastructure and enact semi-independently from the tech policies of these giants. But us normal folk? Not a chance. Today, we will be talking about major corporations' unpersoning of people and why this isn't likely to go away anytime soon. Now, if a major bank starts closing down your accounts for your political beliefs, what's to stop all other major high street banks from doing the same? And before you accuse me of being paranoid, this has already happened. Admittedly to far-right extremists, but the Overton window, the window of acceptable social discourse, is narrowing. How long before they come for your views? Imagine being unpersoned from social media and subsequently from all mainstream banking infrastructure. How can you even live in the modern world like that? Back in the day when you were exiled from society, there was another society to go to. Now, the world over, there are the same corporations controlling everything. You simply cannot escape. Perhaps the only place that has a competing infrastructure is China, but China has taken social ostracization to another level with their social credit. Over there, in China, every citizen has a social credit score. Consider this your good citizen score, as determined by the Chinese state. If you buy products made in China, your score goes up. If you post bad things on social media about the Chinese government, it goes down. If you associate with people who have a low social credit score, it also goes down. Unsurprisingly, dating sites in China often feature the social credit score as a searchable component, meaning that you can completely ignore the untouchables in society. And this social credit score has very real effects. It allows you to get low interest loans, be able to maintain certain job positions, get discounts, and even travel.
It may seem scary, but it's just like that here. We're used to it, and anyway, we don't have a choice.
There's a particular notable example of a man in China who said traditional martial arts were nonsense and that he could defeat any master of them easily with his intermediate MMA skills. Xu Xiongdang then went on a spree where he defeated traditional art masters one after the other, sometimes with a single blow, and this was extremely well publicized. Obviously, this embarrassed the Chinese government that was promoting a resurgence in traditional Chinese culture. Long story short, they began destroying his life by tanking his social credit score. They took away his business, his friends, and he could only move around by bus as his social credit score was too low to fly.
我20年待的地方，说没就没了。我在我自己的微博上，我写我很光荣，我是上海的教练。
Yet he still kept proving them wrong. He still kept his rebellion against the Chinese state because he knew that it was worth fighting for something more important than himself. And in a way, through defeating traditional martial artists, he was trying to prove a point that the Chinese government doesn't know the solutions to everything. But I fear that this type of heroism is few and far between. How many people would be willing to ruin their lives to prove a point? And I fear we're creating this type of social disenfranchisement through the back door. It's not the governments of the world that are necessarily guiding these initiatives, but the corporations themselves, partially to appeal to what they perceive to be their core audiences. Or more specifically, what in psychology is termed as weird. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, as despite these types of people representing 80% of samples in scientific research papers, they're only about 12% of the world. On the other hand, appealing to these weird people and their liberal biases also coincidentally allows tech corporations to gain more power and influence than they might have otherwise had. In other words, they can muscle in on the very functioning of society itself. Facebook, for example, once conducted a study where they determined they could affect the mood of their users at the press of a button by changing what posts they saw, given the fact that they control the algorithms that guide user interactions. Of course, if you don't want to participate and be their guinea pig, critics might then say that you're free to leave.
That's right, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram, no WhatsApp.
But what these critics forget is that these tech giants have a nasty habit of buying their competitors early before they can pose a risk.
Uh-oh, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook is at it again, this time installing quietly a new tracking app on your phone.
Or they help each other to maintain a market share. They're not a monopoly per se. For example, Google has little to do in Twitter's sphere and mode of communication, but they have shown a remarkable habit of coordinating on policies that benefit them. Perhaps to Westerners this might seem like a novel phenomena, but to the Japanese this is an old hat. Big tech is a keiretsu, or in plain English, a set of companies with interlocking business relationships and holdings. In the legal sense, it is a type of informal business group that are loosely organized alliances. Despite not being the same company, they have created a confederation which they can use to entrench themselves in their own specific niches. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that you've just banned the president of the US and he's thinking about going into a rival platform called Parler. But then, you make your allies make some noise. Completely independently then, Amazon decides to stop hosting that company's service, citing the fact that many of the rioters coordinated on Parler, and Google then takes the download option from their store to even download this app. In this way, you've crippled your competition instantly. Well, not you, but the other members of the keiretsu. So your hands are clean. They, on their other hand, can say it was a business decision that coincidentally was parallel to a host of other such policies by supposedly independent companies. Let me stress though, I'm not on Trump's side. I think he's dangerous, narcissistic, and a muppet.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals.
What I say is what I say.
But I do fear that the more immediate danger is big tech being able to decide whose voice to amplify and whom to silence, while being able to heavily determine who gets elected, as was shown by the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Under normal circumstances, this is the moment where you might start bandying about antitrust regulation, break them apart, destroy their power. Surely, if tech monopolies have grown so powerful, then they deserve the same treatment as John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil deserved back in 1911 for anti-competitive practices, where it was broken up into 30 different companies. But not so fast. As opposed to Standard Oil, you can't just hack Google into multiple businesses and expect it to operate. I mean, you could, but they'd rapidly go bankrupt. Google is a search engine, a video platform, an advertising platform, an email server, a self-driving AI design, a quantum computer researcher, and so much more. Some of these projects aren't forecast to make a profit in decades, or they're only useful to collect data to help the development of another project, whilst others are extremely profitable. In other words, by slicing Google's projects apart, you just kill several companies and create weaker versions of Google that can't benefit from business synergies. Look at any other major tech platform, and it's no different. AWS, Amazon's cloud service company, essentially bankrolls the rest of the business, for example. You might argue that this is the point of an antitrust bust, where tech companies would be cut down to size. But is that really what we want? There might be an empathetic yes from the audience, but think two moves ahead. For every tech giant, there's an equal Chinese counterpart. Amazon, Alibaba, Facebook, Tencent, Google, Baidu, YouTube, Youku Tudor. Destroy Amazon into 100 different ineffective and non-profitable entities, and you're only serving the Western markets to the Chinese on a platter. It's happened before. When Twitter abandoned the Vine platform, the niche was quickly taken by Musical.ly, which then merged with TikTok, both of which are of Chinese origin. Since then, TikTok has been branded as a threat to national security. The US makes the case that this app asks for far more permissions than apps of its kind. Among many other things, the harvesting of users' passwords and credit card information. Not only that, but this information would be freely accessible to the Chinese state, as given TikTok is a Chinese-owned firm. It also means that the Chinese government could invoke its 2017 National Intelligence Law to demand this data on some 100 million US TikTok users. In other words, unlike Standard Oil 100 years ago, where you could break it up in isolation from the rest of the world and focus purely on the mechanics thereof and build a much more competitive marketplace, now that's not necessarily the only concern. Increasingly, we're seeing much more heated geopolitical tensions, and in the coming decades, these conflicts will be duked out in the corporate and economic realm, perhaps more so than with actual troops and tanks. So it makes little sense for the US to kneecap its most powerful tools for the incoming conflict and all but guarantee China its victory. The tech oligarchs might be bastards who think they're above the law, but at least they're our bastards who think they're above the law, rather than beholden to some foreign power. And if this geopolitical issue wasn't enough, I can supply an economic one as well. Take a look at the S&P 500, a list of the 500 biggest companies in the US by market capitalization, which in aggregate represent about 70 to 80% of the US stock market's value. It's a shorthand gauge to determine how well the stock market is doing overall, and that's where investors get the expected 7 to 8% annual returns from. I must caveat though, that the economy and the stock market are two different beasts, as we all saw over the course of 2020. In either case, look at the composition of the S&P 500. Do you notice anything funny? The 10 biggest stocks make up over a quarter of the index's value. And which companies are there? Well, none other than your Apples, your Microsofts, your Facebooks, and your Googles. In other words, eliminate the tech oligopolies and you could potentially instantly lose up to a quarter of your GDP growth. That assumption is also purely based on the market cap alone and not counting on the underlying disruption to entire business models that have built themselves around the expectations of these unfettered services. You might accidentally cause an extreme shock to the entire Western world's economy that has built dependencies on their systems. Remember a few months ago when Google services went down for an hour and people were locked out of their homes because they had used smart locks? And for what end? If you were to destroy the tech oligopolies, they'd just be replaced by Chinese services that the US government can control even less than they can their own US oligopolies. So, those are the circumstances. The era of easy solutions are long gone. I fear that tech oligopolies are here to stay, as incumbents will be squashed or bought out. And realistically speaking, there's little that the governments can do about it without crippling their influence for decades to come. I don't propose solutions because I honestly don't have any. My one ray of hope is that decentralized blockchain technology will allow over time to grow less reliant on these tech oligopolies by providing open source alternatives. That said, I'm not holding my breath for that though, as much the same arguments were used in regards to Linux and the Windows monopoly in the 90s. I fully expect our corporate overlords are here to stay in one form or another. I think the westernized social credit score is inevitable. It won't come all at once, but it'll be loose alliances with companies where they create profile for users and pool the information they have on them. Then, based on whether their behaviors benefit them, the tech oligopolies will help them or eliminate them. It'll be a soft dictatorship where profit maximization is the chief concern. Strap in, folks. This is gonna get worse before it gets better.